All right, Senator Ward, you should be all set.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to the Senate Education Committee. We're going to be doing executive today and we have a special presentation at 10. But before we do anything else, let me read the right to know script. Welcome, I'm Senator Ruth Ward from Senate District 8. Today we'll be holding a meeting of the Senate Education Committee. Before we get started, I'll read through a checklist to ensure that the meeting we are holding is in compliance with the right to know law. As chair of the Education Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04 and its extensions, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. In accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that 1, we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possible by video and other electronic means. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the committee and selected legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously at this meeting through this platform. And the public has access to contemporaneously watch and or listen to the meeting on Zoom or YouTube and via phone by following the directions and links provided at the General Court website. 2, we have provided public access of the necessary information for accessing the meeting in the Senate calendar. 3, we are providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there is a problem with access. If anyone has a problem, please email remote senate, one word, at leg.state.newhampshire.us or call 603-271-6931. 4, in the event the public is unable to access the meeting, will be adjourned and rescheduled. 5, please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be by roll call vote. 6, finally, let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state where they are and if anyone else is in the room with you during the meeting, which is required under the right to know law. I will call the roll. Senator Hennessy.
Good morning, everyone. Erin Hennessy from Littleton. I am home alone in the room.
Senator Risciardi.
Good morning, everyone. Denise Risciardi, and I'm home alone in our home in Bedford.
Senator Khan.
Good morning. This is Jay Khan. I'm in Keene in my home. My wife is elsewhere in the house.
Senator Prentice.
Good morning, Sue Prentice. I'm in my home in West Lebanon, New Hampshire, and my husband and my dog Maisie are in the house, but in a different room.
Okay. And I am Ruth Ward from Senate District 8. Welcome, everyone. The first line of item here is to go into executive session. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Senator, okay, they'll have a roll call. Senator Hennessy,
Yes.
Senator Risciardi,
Yes.
Senator Khan,
Yes.
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
and the chair, Ruth Ward, yes. Okay, we're in executive session. Let's take up House Bill 194. So I have a motion on the House Bill 194.
I move ITL. Inexpedient to legislate.
I second that motion.
Okay. do we have a roll call vote on that? Senator Carr proposes ITL. Senator Hennessy,
No.
Senator Rishardi,
No, excuse me, no.
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Khan,
Yes,
and the chair votes no. So that's 3-2 on ITL. Do I have another motion?
I have a
Senator
motion on,
Hennessy?
Thank you. I move ought to pass on House Bill 194.
Is there a second? Second from Senator Rishardi.
And I'd like to speak to my motion, Madam Chair.
Senator Hennessy, go ahead.
Thank you. So everything that we heard in this hearing, I just go back to myself as a parent. My school district is very good at getting the results out to us so that as a parent, I can make a decision. Is my child doing well, or do we have to have a sit down conversation with, in most cases, it's my son, and some of his teachers. But if I didn't get that information in a timely manner, as a parent, I wouldn't be able to have that sit down conversation. And a lot of times there's a lot of testing that goes on in school districts now. And I'm unaware of when this information should be coming. So as our lives are busier, I would just like to be able to have this information in a more timely manner. And that's why I'm moving on to pass on House Bill 194.
Thank you, Senator Hennessy. Senator Khan.
thank you. The reason I offered the ITL, one is I don't think we've really gotten the evidence that parents aren't getting the information. It sounded like hearsay to me, and I've heard this repeated over multiple legislative sessions. So really, there ought to be stacks of evidence if this is the case. Number two, I think there's a privacy matter of sharing student information, address information. And we've heard that before. I read that at this time in some letters. So I'm surprised that we'd be taking this step. And third, the testimony from Melissa White of the Department of Education told us that there will be parent portals by 2022. We're doing this for what period of time? By 2022, there are going to be parent portals for the DLM, the SAT, the SAS. You won't need to give a student's home address because a parent will be able to put access via a portal electronically. So this is a moot question, and the department's already working on it. So I'm sorry, I just, we shouldn't be acting and changing a law for, what might be one testing period on evidence that's just not clear that there's rampant need to do so.
Okay, I will add that Senator Khan had asked Ms. White at the hearing about just this thing about collecting addresses. And she stated that the New Hampshire DOE does not collect student addresses at this point.
Right.
So that should remove that concern. Any other discussion, Senator Khan?
It's not so much the point of the department, and yes, I think that point has been made in the past, but I think sharing an address with a testing company so that they can market additional products, and that's just not the purpose of these exams. So I'm glad that the department doesn't collect the information and that they let the school districts maintain that communication with parents. But I don't believe that it should be shared with the testing company either.
Okay. Any other discussion? Senator Prentice?
I thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to touch base or speak up to Senator Khan's point about the sharing of information. The devil is in the details in all of these bills. And I think that if, the majority of Granite Staters, and I've seen previous legislators go to great lengths to make sure that, to really scrutinize how, our information, our personal information is used. And if it's going to be used in any other manner, there has to be a very specific provision and permission for that. So that is of great concern to me, number one. And number two, having worked inside state government, I want to note that if we're doing something that's temporary, that's going to require the department to actually, take on a project to have to establish this program for then it to become accessible through a portal. I think there might be a better use of DOE's time in different areas that we've talked about in this committee. And so I'm not sure this is the most efficient pathway forward. So that's what I have to say this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Prentice. Any other comments?
If I'd add one more, and Madam Chair, and this is actually Ava, while I don't see in this docket, but there's a mix of some dockets have the sign-in sheets and other dockets don't. So I may be asking you that for other bills, but I don't see under this 194, I don't see the sign-in sheets that for this one.
Senator Khan, if you want to just take a peek at the OneDrive, on the main page, there's a larger folder where they're all now consolidated in sign-in sheets. It just says sign-in sheets final, and it should be in there.
I have the sign-in sheet, so obviously it's available.
Yeah, I'm sorry. In some places it was in the docket.
Okay,
In other places. So I get it. Thank you for the reference. I think it might be helpful to have it in with the bill. So that we're not constantly toggling back and forth.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we're on House Bill 194. Are you ready for a vote? The motion is ought to pass. Senator Hennessy,
Yes.
Senator Ricciardi,
Yes.
Senator Prentice,
No,
Senator Khan,
No,
Senator Ward is yes. That's 3-2. And who wants to take it out? Senator Hennessy will take it out. Thank you. The next one is 442. House Bill 442 relative to penalties for schools' failure to file Department of Education reports. Do we have a motion for the bill?
move off to pass.
Senator Khan moves out to pass. In the second, Ricciardi? You would second in the motion?
Yes.
Okay, let's take a vote on it. Senator Hennessy,
Yes.
Senator Ricciardi,
Yes.
Senator Prentice,
yes.
Senator Khan,
Yes,
and Senator Ward votes yes. So that's 5-0. Do you want to put that on consent?
Move to put it on consent.
Second.
Senator Prentice and Senator Hennessy. So Senator Hennessy
Yes.
on consent, Senator Ricciardi,
Yes.
Senator Khan,
yes,
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
and Senator Ward is yes. So that's 5-0. We still need to have somebody to take it out if necessary. Senator Ricciardi, okay. Great. Next one is 242. It's
There's an amendment for that.
relative to the content of an adequate education. Do I hear a motion? Senator Hennessy?
I move ought to pass, and I also have an amendment to this.
Yeah, okay. To pass by Senator Hennessy, second.
Which bill are we on?
House Bill 242.
It was seconded, I believe, Madam Chair, by Senator Rishardi.
Okay, good. Senator Hennessy?
Madam Chair. Oh, that's all we need is the first and the second.
The first one, okay, great. So
Okay.
motion and second, and now we need to discuss the amendment. Senator Hennessy?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment, however, it's not correctly worded. It's a draft amendment from OLS. I was just wondering how we should proceed. It's what I think is an easy committee fix to the amendment. So I could move ought to pass on amendment 1044S with deleting lines 11 and 12 of that amendment.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Anybody, does that make sense?
It does. So ultimately, whatever changes are made while you guys are execing are going to be wrapped up in one committee amendment anyways. So if you
Okay.
want to speak to your amendment and then talk through the deletions, I'm going to make note of it regardless, and that'll be wrapped up in the committee amendment.
Okay. Do you want to address why you're making the amendment?
Yes, I
Senator
just need a
Hennessy?
second first.
Pardon?
I just need a second first, or no?
Nope, we could just discuss it and then we'll just do one vote on the amendment.
Oh, okay, so we don't need to second the amendment? Ought to pass?
To pass on the amendment, yes.
Yeah. So I moved ought to pass on the amendment.
Okay, and then a second.
Rishardi seconds.
Okay,
Now, now can we vote on it or do we have to discuss?
Now I
it?
want to discuss it. if
Now
that's-
we discuss the amendment.
Okay.
Okay.
So this piece of the amendment deals with section 4, and sorry, I have to toggle back and forth between the bill and the amendment. And the reason why I introduced this, so this is on page 2 of the amended House bill, halfway down in section 4. And this was a concern that was brought to my attention related to how many certificates of valid completion certificates from an alternative program a high school would have to accept for graduation. And right now, the rules pursuant to RSA 541A, I believe, allow 30% of a student's graduation certificates to be from an approved alternative program. And there were some concerns if we didn't reference this, if we didn't put in section C of this amendment, then a high school would have to accept 100%. And so this just puts this bill in line with actual practice from alternative programs in the state of New Hampshire.
Thank you.
And I believe this was a recommendation from Carl Ladd.
Okay.
Where is this in the bill, in the amendment?
Lines 8 through 10. So the rules adopted by the State Board of Education allow 30% right now.
Thank you, and I gotta find.
So what we have in the bill on page 2, line 22 through 24, and then we're adding this amendment to clarify.
Yep.
Schools
And-
that accept credits required for high school graduation consistent with rules adopted by the State Board of Education pursuant to 541-A. And that will be C.
Yes.
And then we're eliminating this C on page 2. Is that right? Or does
Yes.
that become D?
Yep. And deleting in the amendment, I do not want lines 11 and 12.
Okay.
So lines 11 and 12 were the original language that would
Mhm.
require the Board of Education to adopt new rules, and there's
I see,
already
okay.
rules.
Okay,
So this just references those rules that have already been adopted.
okay. Are you ready to
I
vote on
would
the
like-
amendment?
I'd like to speak to this.
Senator Khan, go ahead.
I wanted to check the sign-in sheets too. Sorry. Yeah, so we've got 42 people who signed in, and the only people who signed in support are the bill sponsors. So that ought to raise some flags. The other thing that raised flags for me was the testimony from the department where they said that they are doing a very thorough workup. And I believe that they've got a consultant on board looking at our education rules 306, which is our curriculum rules, and looking at DOE minimum standards and statute so that they fall more consistently in line. And there's a little bit more evidence that a re-refer on this would be a wise idea. It's a fairly sweeping set of information that having no school come and testify in favor just, that there really should have been enough discussion about it that would have occurred. And I trust Representative Ladd is well versed in these topics, but we have a lot of educators that could have been, somebody should have been able to speak in favor of these. And then finally, the cost definitions here, I don't think have gotten enough discussion to adhere to the definitions from 2008 as to how we're going to cost education as opposed to factoring in any kind of outcome score, factoring in other measures that have been taken and required of school districts since 2008 into what might constitute base costs if you really wanted to figure that. And then to rely on those base costs the way that we do, $3,709 as representative of base cost of education. There are things here that just this committee, I think, really should have deeper conversations about than putting it into statute at this time. So I would welcome to hear more from the department about their findings, about the alignment of rules and statute. I would love for this committee to have more discussion about what constitutes a base cost of education. But I would hope that we would re-refer.
It
this.
looks to me like this is relative to the content of an adequate education. What should be the content of an education? And I see all kinds of things here. Recommended: engineering, socioeconomic, geopolitical challenges, financial literacy. Obviously things that are not being taught right now or not part of the adequate education component. Mathematics, biology, physical sciences. It seems to me there's a whole long list of what ought to be part of it. Senator Hennessy.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Since we're talking about the amendment right now, if you look at Barrett Christina's testimony, this was their one, the New Hampshire School Board Association's one objection to this bill, and that's why I brought this amendment forward.
Thank you. So I guess we're still on the amendment, right? The amendment to the bill and that particular thing on page 2. Now, are you ready to vote on the amendment? Okay, Senator Hennessy,
Yes.
Senator Ricciardi,
Yes.
Senator Khan,
Yes,
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
and Senator Ward votes yes. So the amendment passes with 5-0. Now we have to take a look at the underlying bill. I have an vote to pass and with a second on the underlying bill. Now with the amendment that has just passed, what is the vote? Do I have a motion? Or do we take a second? We have a motion and a second.
So now we're at amended, so we need a first and a second,
Another first and a second
because this is a new ought to pass as amended.
with amendment. Okay. Do I have a motion of ought to pass with the amendment? Senator Hennessy?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
This,
I-
what?
I move ought to pass as amended.
Thank you. Senator Ricciardi,
Second.
Senator Prentice,
Oh, so Madam Chair, that was a first and a second, so now we're going to vote?
okay, first and the second.
Yep.
Too many roll call votes.
I know it. I know it.
Senator Hennessy voted ought to pass and Senator
Yep.
Ricciardi
I-
seconded.
and
Senator Khan wants to say something.
I back to the comments that I offered previously. I do believe that throughout this bill, there are references to the base costs of education. So while there are, refinements of the language for what are the basic elements of an adequate education, there's a lot about cost in here that we have not discussed. What constitutes base cost. We haven't discussed how to work outcomes into these base costs. And we haven't discussed how we would use the Department of Education's review and reconcile that review of their rules and statute. And I just think there's no rush on this. This is something that we could take a more deliberate approach. So
Well, there's not FN on this bill.
Right.
So, and also you can see on page 4 at the bottom there, you have until effect July 1, 2023. So this whole thing is not really being rushed. I think it's sort of opens up to take a look at it and see what works and whether or not it's a realistic option for education.
I think that should be done by this committee, and that's why I would vote against it at this time and hope to have a re-refer motions so that we could have that discussion, engage more educators in that conversation.
Okay, I think we're still on the ought to pass with Hennessy and Ricciardi motioning and seconding. Senator Hennessy, on the vote, ought to pass.
Yes.
Senator Prentice,
No,
Senator Ricciardi,
Yes,
Senator Khan,
No,
and the chair votes yes, so that's 3-2. Who wants to take it out? Senator Hennessy will take it out. Let's see what time, 31. The next one is 609, House Bill 609. That has a finance note on it. That is relative to innovation schools. Do we have a motion on that one?
I move re-refer.
Senator Khan moves re-refer.
Madam Chair, Senator Prentice has her hand raised.
oh, it's okay. I was just going to make a motion.
Oh, okay.
So I'll second Senator Khan's motion.
Okay, let's take a vote on re-refer. This is 609, relative to innovation schools. Permits schools and school districts to develop a plan for waiving rules to become an innovation school. Senator Hennessy for re-refer.
No.
Senator Ricciardi,
no,
Senator Prentice,
Yes,
and Senator Khan,
Yes,
and Senator Ward is no, so that's 2-3. Do I have another motion?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
uh,
Senator
before
Khan?
Before we get to the other motion, I just would like to speak to it. And just to see if we can come back to a re-refer motion. I took the opportunity of talking with, doing some more research on this, looking at other states and talking to Education Commission of the states. I think there are independent advice that we could be seeking about this bill. The sponsor indicated that he used Colorado as an example. We heard from people giving testimony that an important stakeholder in this is teachers and staff. And what's been put into the bill is pretty selective from what is in the Colorado statute and in practice. They require over 50%, and in other states, it's over 60% of their teachers and staff to approve of an innovation school. And the purpose of doing so, if you think about it, makes absolute sense. It's so that the people who have to implement it have in fact embraced what the innovation is that's going to be implemented. There are reports on this, annual reports from different states. There are consultants that would be glad to spend time with us from the Education Commission of the states. Again, I don't think this is something that needs to be rushed through. And I would invite you to take a look at, I think on this one, there were 167 people who signed in. And again, not a person signed in favor. So except for legislators and the one vendor who spoke to it. So I believe that the proper motion for us at this time is to re-refer. And while I offered that and it was defeated, I would invite somebody else from the committee to speak to this and offer that motion so that we could take the proper time to engage, again, educators and external review bodies before we pass this legislation.
Thank you. Senator Prentice.
I'd like to make a motion to re-refer. And I'd be happy to speak to my motion once it's seconded.
Okay, I have a question before you do.
Sure.
I thought I heard that there were some innovation schools in New Hampshire. Does anybody know about that? I guess not. Okay, Senator Prentice, go ahead.
Do we need a second before?
Madam
Yes.
Chair,
Senator Hennessy.
I think Senator Prentice meant to reconsider a re-refer motion and not make a re-refer motion. Because didn't we just?
We already, yeah, so
Yeah.
We
the,
have voted re-refer 2 to 3.
so I'm going to ask for, make a motion to reconsider the re-referral motion.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, do I need a second before
Yes,
we can discuss? Is anybody willing to second this?
I'll second it so we can
Okay.
discuss it.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I have to agree with Senator Khan. Conceptually, I don't think that this is necessarily a bad idea, but I do feel that it's premature. I don't think we've settled other educational issues in New Hampshire. People, you know, when we're seeing sign-in sheets with people opposing and not in favor, and we still move in a direction, it just makes me wonder, like, what is the rush? That's what I want to know. What is the rush? And it seems that some of the voters think that, you know, that there is no rush either. So I'm with Senator Khan on this, and I'd ask my colleagues to consider that this isn't going to hurt us to take the time that we need to make sure that this is the best fit for New Hampshire. That's all.
Anybody else wants to say something? I think when you look at the sign-in sheets, I also think you have to take a look at who are these people. And I think what I have seen most of any kind of change in education, addition, deletion, whatever, you have the educators coming out in force, and it's very hard to find parents or other people who might be interested in actually coming to testify. So I think that I don't think we can always go with who is opposing and who is supporting. And I've seen that in many cases. So that's my 2 cents worth. Senator Hennessy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was recently on a Zoom meeting, as all of our meetings are these days, and it was with 2 different SAUs in my district up in Coos County. And if you've seen my district, it's quite large, and there's a lot of different SAUs, and there's a lot of small communities that have difficulty doing things because of just cost constraints and because of distance and busing and how far they would have to work for their children. But what I heard was 2 different SAUs trying to work together to the advantage of the kids. And I was really impressed with some of the things that they were doing. And they said that they've had some challenges because of certain rules or laws that are in place. And one actually had to do with busing. And the reason why I like the idea of this bill is that, in my opinion, when 2 school districts get together, they're not going to try to subvert state laws to hurt their children. They're trying to do it so they could give the kids in their districts the best education possible and best extracurricular activities possible. And I think this piece of legislation allows them to do that. It gives them the little missing link to try and work together. And if you've gone to any of your school board, especially the smaller one, the meetings when they're looking at the budget, school boards are going to have to try and work together. They're going to have to use technology to put classes together. They're going to have to come up with new and interesting ideas to help serve our kids. And I think this just gives them the piece to do that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to provide a moment of clarity about the motion at hand. So the re-refer motion was defeated. Therefore, it was open to any new motion, which it could hypothetically be a re-refer motion. So the reconsider is not necessary as the motion was defeated. So the re-refer motion that Senator Prentice provided is appropriate because the first motion was defeated. Any motion, even the same motion, can be reintroduced on
Okay.
before the committee.
So we had a motion, Senator Prentice motion for re-refer, and I
Mhm.
second the motion, and we're having a discussion. So we are
Perfect.
on target, right?
Yep, and then
Okay,
we can vote.
okay. Any, Senator Khan?
Yeah, one of the other observations that in addition to the engagement of stakeholders, which is, pointed out during testimony, was left out of this bill. There are guardrails that are often put on the innovative schools in the states that have implemented, and the guardrails being these can be curricular, for cost savings, for efficiencies of staff. In any case, like 6 categories are standard. What those guardrails are intended to do is to make sure that safety and background checks and other rules that we ask our schools to follow are not waived. Again, this isn't a complicated change. It just hasn't been incorporated into this bill at this point. So, I appreciate the cost saving idea that Senator Hennessy has put forward that makes sense in her district. That certainly ought to be something that we try to encourage. So I do think that educators getting involved in this idea so that it's not something that's being done to them, but done for them is an opportunity for us in this bill. I don't think we're taking advantage of either the research, the experience of other states, and the opportunity for engagement that might help this be more successful.
Okay, this is a voluntary activity. I mean, the school boards, the school districts don't have to do it. It's an option that if they are interested, they may develop a program and they may talk to other people, and the local school boards will hold a public hearing on the plan. So there seems to me that's a lot of opportunity for local municipalities to decide, is this something that we want to pursue or isn't it? And I don't think we want to stifle innovation in our public schools. I mean, it seems to me that we're trying more and more to offer flexibility in programs and how we do things. So that's how I look at it. And the fact is that nobody's saying that the school have to do this. It is not mandatory. It's totally, it's flexible, and it's a may in everything. Any further discussion? So we have a second motion of re-refer. Senator Prentice motioned it and I second it. Are you ready for a vote? Senator Hennessy,
No.
Senator Ricciardi,
No,
Senator Khan,
Yes.
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Ward, no. So that goes to 2-3. Another motion? Then I'll motion ought to pass on the bill. Do I have a second? Senator Hennessy? Senator Hennessy,
Yes.
Senator Shardy,
Yes.
Senator Khan,
No,
Senator Prentice,
No,
Senator Ward. Yes, there's 3-2, ought to pass. Who wants to take it out? I can take it out. Thank you. We have 14 minutes. Don't know. Do we have time for one more? We can start this one on House Bill 320, requiring a civics competency assessment as a high school graduation requirement. And there was a lot of discussion. I think most of the Senator Prentice, most of the discussion had to do with that. We can't do this in 60 days. Senator Prentice,
oh, I was going to make a motion,
go ahead.
inexpedient to legislate. I'd be happy to speak to my motion once it's seconded.
Do we have a second?
second.
Senator Khan seconds it. Senator Prentice, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My main concern with this, and I brought it up during the hearing, I have no opposition to, bringing a robust, civics program to, our Granite State schools. I think that this is an area I don't know if we say we can all agree, but we know that, that we agree that is important. But it is the fact that this assessment could get in the way of someone's graduation and ability to move forward in their education. I think we should support this type of education, but not create roadblocks, because where some students are strong in one area, they might not be strong in another. And I think it's an unnecessary barrier. And I don't want, so it's an unnecessary barrier. I want to have this type of education, but I don't think an assessment is necessary, especially when it could actually impact their ability to graduate. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, then I have a question. In what way does it inhibit their ability to graduate? Because
Well,
it's too soon?
It says it to be eligible for a graduation certificate, a student shall attain a locally sanctioned passing grade
Mhm.
on the competency assessment and a grade of 70% or better and on this 128 questions. And when I asked the specific question during the hearing, whether the graduation certificate was equal to a diploma. In fact, I believe I asked this to somebody from the Department of Education, and they said yes. So unless I missed something in the translation, I'm understanding that this could be a deal breaker. Did I miss something?
Well, I think what they were talking about is they couldn't do it for the graduating class this spring.
Yeah.
So I have a committee amendment. I'm suggesting that we should put this effective date to July 1st, 2023. That will give an opportunity for the people entering in the fall to have several years to pick up this before they graduate. So they're not going to be hit with it this spring. Does that make a difference, Senator Prentice? It doesn't make a difference.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's whenever it happens. So I appreciate the ramping in or phasing in period, but I'm still just opposed to making this assessment a requirement, but I am not opposed to civics education, a robust program in New Hampshire. So that's all.
Okay.
Thank
Any
you.
other further discussion? Senator Hennessy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be voting against the ITL motion. So I did a little looking into this, and this is a test where the answers are all available. So you can study to the test. And I think that's the point, is you should be studying to the test because we should all know the answers to these questions. It's not like the SAT where there's a different geometry question every time, and you have to know the concepts, but you won't know the answer. You'll know the answer to this. And if you don't, you can take it again. And if you have to take it 2 or 3 times, it's not much of a difference in the time commitment for these kids. So since I have kids, I had my 7th grader going to school to ask his social studies teacher what the teacher thought about making this a mandatory requirement for graduation. And I got a thumbs up, so I'll be voting in favor of this bill.
Senator Khan, did you have something?
Yeah, I'd encourage all of you to take the test before you vote.
That would be a good thing, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I did. It's right out there, 128 questions, and you can find it on the Naturalization and Immigration Service page. Anyway, just look it up, civics test. It's you know, and I mean, besides the fact that some of the questions are take a little thought, a little refresher, and I doubt that I would not get, I know I would not get 100 on my first try. And then, you know, what are we setting up here? If this is the test that's online and I could look at it here and fill it out there, and I can take it as many times as I want. I think it's a valuable learning tool. I guess I agree with Senator Prentice. I don't think it's a requirement for graduation. So if this was, you know, stated as such that you know, all students will take this as a part of the civics requirement, I think that would be a valuable thing for students to do as a part of the course. And I give my thumbs up to that too. As a requirement for graduation, 128, it's not a 10-minute test. I mean, you're not flying through there just circling A's and B's. You're thinking, you know, how to fill these in. And, you know, the attention span of people is different. And so I value what this is bringing forward. I don't value the idea that this is a requirement.
Okay. Any other discussion? So we have a motion and a second, and we're voting on the ITL. How do you vote? Senator Hennessy?
No.
Senator Ricciardi?
No.
Senator Prentice?
Yes.
Senator Khan?
Yes.
Senator Ward? No. So that's 2 to 3. Eva, I have to ask you, for example, I want to change the date for the effective date. At what point do we do that?
So now that that motion was defeated, someone will need to introduce a new motion. Potentially, and then after that would be an appropriate, it would need a first and a second. So let's say it was ought to pass. We need a first and a second and then discussion. And that's when you would introduce your committee amendment. And then we'd vote on a committee amendment and then ought to pass is amended.
Okay, so we need a new motion on the bill, right? Okay. Another motion on the bill on 320? Senator Hennessy,
I move ought to pass.
a second? Senator Ricciardi,
Discussion would be the next.
discussion. I like to change the effective date on this bill from 60 days after passage to at July 1st, 2023. That's my motion. Do I have a second for that?
Second the amendment.
Senator Hennessy,
Second.
thank you. You'll vote on that. Senator Hennessy,
Yes.
Senator Ricciardi,
Yes.
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Khan,
Yes.
thank you. So we have changed the date of the effective date on this bill.
Madam Chair, did you vote yes?
Yes,
Okay.
July 1st, 2023. Okay, with that taken care of, then we have to vote on the underlying bill, which now is at ought to pass
As amended.
as amended. Senator Hennessy,
I move ought to pass as amended.
thank you. Second. Senator Rishardi. Okay, so we vote. Senator Prentice,
No,
Senator Khan,
No,
Senator Hennessy,
Yes.
Senator Rishardi,
Yes.
Senator Ward votes yes. That's 3-2. Who wants to take it out? Senator Hennessy. And I need a motion to come out of executive session because it's very close to 10 o'clock. Senator Prentice,
motion to come out of executive session.
thank you. A second. Senator Hennessy. Senator Rishardi,
Yes.
out of executive session. Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Khan,
yes.
Senator Hennessy,
Yes.
and Senator Ward, you will vote yes. Thank you very much. We did a lot of work done for the executive session, got some bills out. Now I am looking forward to a presentation by the DOE.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I just wanted to let you know, I do see a few members of Senate Finance in the attendees, including Senate President Morse, Senator Rosenwald, Senator Reagan. So I just want to let you know they're present.
okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Madam Chair, are you anticipating a PowerPoint presentation?
I don't really know what I'm anticipating. Ava, do you know?
I have yet received a copy of any of what the presentation is going to be today. As soon as we hit 10 o'clock, I'll allow Caitlin Davis in from NHDOE. And if she has it, we'll figure out how to screen share. I just haven't been given the presentation in advance.
Okay. You had all time to stand up and stretch.
Okay, Madam Chair, it is 10, so I'm gonna bring in Caitlin Davis from NHDOE and Mark. I don't want to butcher the last name, but yep, that sounds right. Okay, so Mark and Caitlin, you should be all set to unmute yourselves.
Ava, could you actually make us members of the panel as well so we can screen share? We have our presentation available.
Well, they figure that out. Welcome, Mark and Caitlin. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. We're always excited to be able to talk about the work that we do at the Department of Education. So
Of course.
Well, sorry you didn't receive the document in advance. For the record, Mark Manganello with the Department of Education. But I'll start sharing it. Let's see. Can everyone see that?
So I'll go ahead and I'll give a brief introduction, and then Mark will take over and talk about the adequacy education funding formula, and then various other school funding. And we will go to as long as you either decide you're sick of hearing us talk or until we run out of time, because we'll never run out of things to talk about. So Mark, if you could just scroll down to the page that has the high level of all the state funding on it.
Oh, yep. Everyone can see this document, right?
Yes.
Lost.
So
Is it scrolled?
this,
Is it scrolled on your computer because it's not on the screen?
I'll do, can you see that?
Nope.
Oh,
I think we can just see the top page. So, so while Mark is working on getting those adjustments, I'm going to give a brief overview and just kind of get us kicked off here for the meeting. So good morning. For the record, I'm Caitlin Davis. I'm a director at the Department of Education. I have with us on the phone today, Mark Manganello. He just introduced himself. Many of you recognize him. He's previously with the LBA, and now he works over here in the Office of School Finance. Also on the phone today, I have, if we have time, Amy Clark, who works in the Office of School Facilities, and she oversees building aid, lease aid, public school infrastructure fund, many things. So just a brief reminder for the department, or relative to the department. So the Department of Education on a normal year has approximately $1.3 billion budget. That budget, it consists of general funds, state funds, and federal state education trust fund funds, other funds, which are not mostly fees that are raised by the department, and federal funding. Approximately $200 to $300 million each year is federal money that flows from the Department of through the Department of Education, from the U.S. Department of Education and Department of Agriculture directly to school districts, meaning that we have the responsibility of overseeing those funds and making sure that school districts are properly implementing those funds. This year is a novel year, as we know. And there's approximately $500 million of additional federal stimulus funds that are flowing through the Department of Education directly to school districts. The intention of this presentation today is not to discuss that. We can discuss that at a different time, but I just wanted to go over that. So of the $1.3 billion normal budget the Department of Education has, we have some state aids to school districts that you see here in front of you. So you can see that approximately $1 billion each year makes up the Education Trust Fund adequacy funding formula. We also have state special education aid, which was previously known as catastrophic aid. It goes to high cost special education students to help districts mitigate their costs. Many of these students cost a district well over $100,000. So the state reimburses a district for part of those expenses. Tuition and transportation aid is approximately $9 million each year. That funding goes to school districts with regional career and tech education centers to pay for tuition and transportation for CTE programs around the state. We have building aid. So building aid is funding that there's kind of two pots of funding in building aid. There is something called the building aid tail, which are historical building aid projects that were approved prior to 2010 when the state went into a moratorium. The state previously used to pay school building projects in something called a tail. So that means a school district would take out a bond and the Department of Education would pay a portion of that school district's bond for the next 20 to 30 years. So these are the remaining tail payments. We have the Public School Infrastructure Fund. The Public School Infrastructure Fund was developed in 2017 to provide funding to school districts on maybe a competitive manner for funding for infrastructure type schools projects, safety projects, and E-rate projects. We have lease aid for charter schools, which pays a portion of charter schools' lease. We have charter school adequacy and regular adequacy. You also see in front of you a line where it says kindergarten aid. That was previously known as Kindergarten. You only see it 1 year because we only paid Kindergarten 1 year. We paid $1,100 to school districts for all full-day kindergarten kids. And then after 2019, full-day kindergarten was just integrated in part of the state funding formula. So we're going to kick off and we're going to start talking about specifically the Education Trust Fund, the largest pot of money in there, the adequacy funding formula. I should mention all of these pots of money that I just mentioned here are in the Education Trust Fund. And so Mark is going to take it over and just the way that we typically do these is we have a couple places where we pause. We usually will pause maybe after we got done speaking about a specific sheet, and then feel free to jump in and take questions. We don't want to hold questions to the end just because they can kind of add up. So Mark, you can take it away.
Thanks, Caitlin. So this is just a summary sheet of what adequacy is. For those who don't know what adequacy is, it's our constitutional obligation to provide an adequate education. So we distribute adequacy aid grants. Adequacy is kind of the umbrella term. So anytime we pay a adequacy aid grant, it's just called adequacy aid. But then there's a subcomponent called the cost of an adequate education. So we'll talk, as we talk about the formula, we'll delineate those two. Some recent changes to the formula in the current biennium that we're in. Full day kindergarten was added to the formula in 2020. And so the way the formula works, it's a per pupil formula. And so the way kindergarten used to be funded through adequacy was half a kindergarten student attending full day kindergarten was counted as half an ADM, an average daily membership, half a pupil. And the change that happened in 2020 is they were counted as a full pupil. So therefore they got full funding. And as we go through the formula, that will make more sense. So full day kindergarten was funded through adequacy in 2020, and it continues to be funded under current law in perpetuity. Another big change in the formula in 2020 was stabilization grants were restored to 100% of the 2012 level. And so stabilization grants are a hold harmless grant that was received, that the community started receiving in 2012. And they received it because changes to the formula in 2011 negatively impacted some towns, some communities in 2012. And so the stabilization grant was designed to hold them harmless. So the grant you receive in 2012 would not be less than the state grant you received in 2011. And that those are stabilization grants. They exist currently in law. And they were restored to 100% of their 2012 level because in 2017, law started phasing out the stabilization grants by a rate of 4% decline each year. And so 4% decline each year over 25 years would have completely phased them out. So that started in 2017 and then 2018 and then 2019. They kept on reducing by a rate of 4% a year. And then they were fully restored in 2020 back to 100% of the 2012 level. And that exists in current law and at the moment. State fiscal year 2021 is when we talk about the one-time aid, the $60 million in one-time aid, that only exists in state fiscal year 2021. And that was two components were added to the adequacy aid formula that distributed that aid. That aid will go out, has already gone out in state fiscal year 2021 and is set to expire at the end of the state fiscal year. And those two components were called fiscal capacity disparity aid and additional aid based on free and reduced price meal eligible populations. And as we talk about the formula, we'll dive a little bit further into that. As all of you know, some of the big issues going on with the pandemic is how it's impacting our free and reduced priced meal eligible students. That data set has been flawed because of a USDA waiver that waived the requirement to complete documentation in order to be eligible for a free and reduced price meal. So since they've waived that documentation requirement, we have less documentation, which feeds into less data into our state system. So you've seen SB 135 adjusts the FNR calculation, HB 2 adjusts the FNR calculation. So there's some legislative proposals to fix that, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the other thing that when you look at ADM, you look at pupil student data, enrollment data. Usually enrollment declines about a rate of 1% a year, and it's declined about 4% this year during the pandemic. And we'll go dive deeper into the data in some of these documents. The next document is just, we were asked to provide a pie chart of the Education Trust Fund revenue. So this is from the CAFR for state fiscal year 2020. And it just shows you the breakdown of the revenue categories. The Education Trust Fund is about $1 billion fund, and it takes money from all these different taxes. So a big chunk of it is the statewide education property tax, which we can talk about later. Business enterprise tax, it takes a portion of that. So a portion of that goes to the general fund, a portion of that goes to the Education Trust Fund. Lottery Commission, all of their profits go to the Education Trust Fund. But this document just sort of tells you where that money is coming in to fund schools. Caitlin already discussed, these are our school aid appropriations. Some of them are funded through the Education Trust Fund. Now all of them, almost all of them are funded through the Education Trust Fund. Historically, some of these programs, these ones highlighted gray, were funded through general funds, but now they're funded through Education Trust Fund dollars. Building lease aid is not funded, that's funded through general funds. So this is a document the LBA produces. And this, if you're looking to understand the formula, this is a really great document to look at. Mickey Landergan produces this document every year to explain the mechanics of the formula, and it's all on one page, so it's really nice and easy to read, even though the formula can get pretty complicated. So, like I said, the formula is mostly driven by pupil data, and that's what you see here. This is how the formula works. First, every school that serves a kid receives $3,708.78 for each pupil they're serving. That's called base aid. This number dates back to a determination made in 2008 that what is the universal cost per pupil, and that number is adjusted by inflation. It has grown a little bit since then, but that's every student you serve, you get a grant of $3,708.78 per pupil. The other components are called differentiated aid. So for each pupil you serve that is eligible for free and reduced price meals, you receive a grant of $1,854. So if you have one student here who's also eligible for free and reduced price meals, you would receive the $3,708. You would also receive an additional $1,854 to educate that child. The other differentiated aid component is English language learners. So anyone who's been identified as an English language learner in our data set and reported by the schools would be eligible for an extra $725.63. The other one is the other differentiated aid category is special education aid, differentiated aid. So if you have an IEP, if you're a student with an IEP, you would receive an extra $1,995. And then the last differentiated aid category is third grade reading. So the way that works is if you have a student who didn't qualify for any one of these categories, and when they took the third grade reading assessment, they scored below proficiency, then that kid would be counted towards this aid category, and the school would receive an extra $725.63. And so base aid plus differentiated aid is the cost of an adequate education. And when we talk about adequacy, sometimes we're talking about the cost of an adequate education. Sometimes we're talking about the full funding formula. So I just wanted to point that out. Another thing that people sometimes wonder about is I'm receiving differentiated aid based on these categories, how many F&R students I have. That money is not restricted to be spent on those students. It's unrestricted dollars. It's a grant to the schools. They can spend it on educating these students, not specifically the student that the aid category is associated with. So when you add up the base aid, the differentiated aid, you get the cost of an adequate education. The next component you need to factor in is the SWEPT. So the SWEPT is the statewide education property tax. And under current law, the way that works is the state has to assess a tax that will raise $363 million against all of the state's property. So the state has around $190 billion in property. We need to raise $363 million on that property. That results in a tax rate of around $1.85 per thousand. So each community raises and retains that tax. So the local tax collector is going out and collecting that money. DRA has assessed that tax, and the local community goes out and raises it. And so that money stays within that community, within that local community. It never actually comes to the state. So that's an important distinction to make. So when we're determining what we call the preliminary grant, which is the cost of an adequate education minus SWEPT, we've added up how much funding we think you'll need to provide the cost of an adequate education. Then we look at how much money you've raised locally through your, locally through your SWEPT, and we calculate the difference. So if your cost of an adequate education was $1 million, and locally using the statewide education property tax, you raised and retained $500,000, then we would need to fund you another $500,000 to make up that difference. There's some communities that raise with that $1.85 tax rate, they were able to raise a lot of money. So if one community was able to, if they have a lot of property value in their town, in their community, say they raised $2 million using the statewide education property tax, and we calculated that their cost of an adequate education to provide an adequate education was only $1 million, we wouldn't give them a grant because we've already identified that they've raised $2 million through the SWEPT. The cost of an adequate education is only $1 million, so we won't provide them an additional grant. But what they will be able to keep that full $2 million that they raised and retained locally. Just an important thing to point out, because people talk about donor towns. So 10 years ago, around 10 years ago, those communities that raised SWEPT above the cost of an adequate education would provide that funding to the state. So that doesn't exist anymore. If you've raised whatever money you've raised and retained through SWEPT, you get to keep all of it. So I've referred to these towns as excess SWEPT towns. They have excess SWEPT dollars that they get to keep. But that's most communities, what they raise through SWEPT is not greater than the cost of an adequate education. So once we've determined the cost of an adequate education, we've reduced the SWEPT amount. We have to add the stabilization grant, and the stabilization grant is the hold harmless from 2012 that was fully restored to the 2012 level. And some communities don't get stabilization grants because when changes were made to the formula in 2011, they didn't lose any money. So only some communities get a stabilization grant. And then there's some qualifiers here. If your SWEPT is greater than your cost of an adequate education, you don't get a stabilization grant. If you have 0 students in your community, you don't get a stabilization grant. So once we add the stabilization grant, now we're talking about state fiscal year 2021. So now we add the additional aid components, and the additional aid components are additional aid based on FNR, percentage of population. So that aid, the way that aid works is it's a sliding scale, and the higher percentage of students that are FNR eligible, the higher your aid amount, and that's kind of how this graph works. If your FNR population is under 12%, then you don't receive an additional aid based on FNR. But that's the range is from $87 to $350 in aid amount. The other additional aid is fiscal capacity disparity aid, which is based on something called the equalized valuation per pupil. And the way that number is derived is we take the equalized valuation property and divide it by the number of pupils your school serves. So if you have really valuable property, you're going to have a really high equalized valuation per pupil. If you don't have a lot of kids, you're going to have a really high equalized valuation per pupil. If you do serve a lot of kids, you're going to have a kind of low equalized valuation per pupil. And a grant is given to any community that has an equalized valuation per pupil under $1 million. And that's for state fiscal year 2021. And the grant starts at, starting at $350K equalized valuation per pupil, you would receive a grant of $1,750 per pupil. And then that slowly phases out as your equalized valuation per pupil grows. That phases out to $0 if you have $1,001 equalized valuation per pupil. So that's the state fiscal year 2021 formula. The LBA has also published what current law looks like for state fiscal year 2022. And current law for 2022 is the same exact formula, except the additional one-time aid has been removed. So same thing, cost of inadequate education minus SWEPT plus stabilization equals your total education grant.
So I think we can pause right there and take any questions that people might have. And since we're actually members of the panel, we can actually see if other senators have questions too. So if other senators, not members of the public, but senators have questions, you can raise your hands. But does anybody have any questions before we continue? I know it's extremely complex what we've just gone over, so.
Will this information be available to us?
Yes, we sent it over to Ava right before the committee started. So
Okay.
she should have that and she'll send it out to you guys.
Because it's a pretty comprehensive. You need to take a look at it and review.
Yes. Yeah, and we apologize. We know the writing on the screen is a little bit small too. There's a lot of information that we try to pack in on this. So it's very complex and you know, even if you have a question that's little, you know, it sometimes it makes a lot of sense. It helps everybody else too.
So yeah, that's the state fiscal year 21 and 22 formula under current law. These are basically, you can watch the way I describe the formula, you can see it play out for each town in this sort of horizontal view. So same components are being are at play here. We have base adequacy, so you take your average daily membership, which I have not explained yet. So there's a distinction between how many students you have enrolled, because enrollment is kind of a moment in time. We use these terms interchangeably. We probably shouldn't. We should be careful when we use the terms interchangeably. But what average daily membership is calculating is it's looking at the full school year, and it's calculating what, if the kid never left your school, that would be 1 ADM. But some kids move around. So if a kid was in Ackworth for half the school year, we'd count them as half of an ADM for Ackworth. And then if they move to Albany for the other half of the school year, we'd count them as half an ADM for that school year. So ADM is just a way to look at the full school year and count the kid proportionally for where the kid was enrolled. So if they're enrolled in 2 different schools, we'll split the money between those 2 communities. But using these sheets, you can walk through the formula from left to right. You got the base adequacy, you have differentiated aid, gets your cost of inadequate education. Then you got to compare it with the SWEPT. Then you have to add these additional aid components and the stabilization, and you should get your preliminary grant. Preliminary grant doesn't include SWEPT. Final grant includes SWEPT. So that final amount, that $1 billion in adequacy, includes the statewide education property tax. And you can look at your community and walk them through the formula for state fiscal year 2021. And then the same goes for 2022. Same exact process. The formula spreadsheet goes left to right and doesn't include those additional aid components that are not in current law. One of the big things.
Mark, could I ask one question there?
Pandemic.
Could I ask a question on that previous slide? One of the things that doesn't happen there is a count in each of those columns. So while you've got it across in the top in dollar amounts, it's not clear how many towns are receiving, for instance, stabilization aid, fiscal capacity, or the supplemental free and reduced. It's just an information item that I found curious. If there are 246 taxing entities in the state that are receiving education grants, how many are receiving these specialized allocations?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, I don't have that data in front of me, but I could tally that up.
Thanks.
And that's right. Not if you look at the sheet, some towns are not receiving. So if we look at Rye, their FNR percentage is 5%. So they don't have a high percentage of FNR students. So they don't receive additional aid. And then if we look at them here, their equalized valuation is 4.7 million per pupil. So you need to be under $1 million to qualify. So they don't qualify for that additional fiscal capacity disparity aid. And then if we look at stabilization, I don't know why they don't qualify, likely because they weren't hurt by the formula in 2012, but they don't receive a stabilization. So yeah, parsing those numbers out would be helpful in understanding how the formula impacts the communities. Any other questions? Or another thing this committee has worked on Senate Bill 135, which tries to create a hold harmless formula for ADM counts. So as we know, free and reduced price eligible students, that number has dropped about 24% when you look at pre-pandemic to post-pandemic or during the pandemic. And then also just regular enrollments, regular ADM, that's dropped about 4%. So pre-pandemic numbers, we were looking at about 167,000 kids in the state, dropped down to 160. Same with FNR numbers. We know those FNR numbers, these FNR numbers of 34,000, we know those aren't reliable. We know because of the waiver that's negatively impacting those numbers. We would expect there's more kids that are experiencing poverty in our schools than that number would tell us. So this is just some of the data sets. Some communities have seen an increase in population. So Ashland had two kids added to their school district. And then you can look at town by town, how those numbers are impacted. This document, I didn't show this to House Finance, but there's a couple different proposals out there. The Senate's position, since it's passed the Senate, is Senate Bill 135. At the moment, I think the House position is HB 2, which has the governor's language to fix the FNR ADM. So there's two different ways to look at how you want to fix ADM. The Senate has their way, the House at the moment currently has their way. So just to run you through some hypothetical examples of how the two formulas work. If we had a community that had a 5% drop in their enrollment in their ADM and a 25% drop in their FNR ADM, that would look like this. So pre-pandemic, they would have 100 kids and they would have 50 FNR kids. A 5% drop would reduce them down to 95 total kids. And then a 25% drop in FNR, 37.5 FNR kids. So when you run those numbers through the formula, they're going to lose money. They're going to get a lot less money because they're getting less money for these kids and less money for these kids. So with the governor's HB2 language that right now I think the House has, it's still in House Finance, but they're seeking to keep that language. What it does is establish an FNR ratio that existed pre-pandemic and holds them to that pre-pandemic ratio. So if we look at, in this hypothetical scenario, the ratio of 2 to 1, there's for every 2 kids you have, 1 kid is FNR eligible. So that's a ratio, 50% ratio. And so the way the governor's formula looks like is if that community lost 5 kids, so they had an enrollment decline, to calculate the FNR number, you apply that previous year ratio to the total ADM, and that gets you your new FNR amount. So the way the governor's formula, and now the House, at the moment, the House Finances formula works, they would be, instead of losing 5 kids in total enrollment and 12.5 kids in FNR, they lose 5 kids in total enrollment, but they lose only 2.5 in FNR students. So that's the way HB2 works. Senate Bill 135, same scenario. So you have 100 kids, 100 total kids, 50 FNR kids pre-pandemic. What Senate Bill 135 would tell the Department of Education to do is look at those 2 data sets and grab the greater number. So If we look at current law, if we do nothing, these are the data sets we'd be using. And we know these data sets are better, so we're going to use the higher data set. So that would help both the total enrollment number and also the FNR number. When I was going through comparing SB 135 with HB2, I did notice there's some situations where I would kind of expect SB 135 to outperform HB2, but there's actually some scenarios where the governor's formula would increase aid more than Senate Bill 135. So this document is seeking to describe that scenario. So in the scenario where ADM increases by 5%, and say you have a decline in FNR of 25%, you run current law, ADM is growing, FNR is shrunk. We apply the governor's formula, so we're looking at that 2-to-1 ratio. If they've increased by 5 students, then we apply that 50% ratio to that 105 number, and we actually get now 52.5 FNR kids. So in that scenario, FNR numbers are growing above and beyond what they were last year. But if we use the Senate Bill 135 methodology, we don't do that. We would just look at the 2 data sets. These would be the 2 data sets, the 150, the 105 and 37.5, and we'll grab the greater of the 2 numbers. So we'll grab that 105 from this current year, but we'll have to grab the 50 from the previous year. So just in those scenarios, if you see it town by town, HB2 would provide more for some communities than others. Any questions about that? So this is the governor's recommended as introduced to finance. The only change the governor made to adequacy is that FNR calculation. So if we look at current law adequacy, if we do nothing to fix the FNR data, it's going to be about 922 million. And so when you add in the governor's fix, it cost about 16.7 million over current law, brings it into the number you should see on your budget, or approximately the 939 million number. And so this is a town by town, and it shows how the governor's proposal impacts each community. This document is just comparing the governor's recommended, which has just the FNR fix, to Senate Bill 135, which has a total ADM fix. And like I said, some communities like Ashland, since Ashland increased their number of kids, the governor's formula actually is a little bit more generous than Senate Bill 135. But if you'd like to compare those two, you can see a town by town increase decrease spreadsheet for state fiscal year 2022. This document is showing enrollment trends by grade level. So as you can see, of course, the pandemic we know has negatively impacted enrollment. That number has dropped around 7,000 kids, 8,000 kids. So this you can just sort of see, you can look at this and use this information how you want. We will note the home educated students, that data is not super reliable. I think I have a question from Senator Hennessy.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I just had a question on the last page when you had mentioned Ashland.
Yep.
I thought the purpose of the wording of SB 135 was to not harm communities that saw growth in their ADM, and so it was either or.
So that's correct.
Okay.
For base adequacy, that works exactly as designed. And it also does, Senate Bill 135 will hold communities harmless, but when it goes head to head with the governor's proposal, there are situations where the governor's proposal is slightly more generous to a community like Ashland. So if we look back, any community that's increased their number of students, so Ashland is, most communities saw a decline in students, but Ashland is one of the few examples or rare examples where they actually increased their enrollment. And when we use the governor's formula, he applies that pre-pandemic ratio to the new increased enrollment. And he's able to, using his formula, it brings you up to 52.5 students for FNR eligible, where the Senate Bill 135 formula is kind of more of a traditional hold harmless, and then we'll just say, what is the better data set? So 105 is great for this community because they increase the number of kids, but I can't get to 52.5. I have to look at the two data sets, which would be 150 and 105 and 37.5, and I have to pick the best one for FNR. And so I picked the 50. That's how the SB 135 calculation works.
Gotcha. Thank you.
But yeah, it's a little tricky. My first hunch was that Senate Bill 135, since it costs more, should provide more money for each community, but that's not exactly the case. And then, yep, this is just a 10-year trend of enrollment. This document, House Finance asked for this document. There's still some unknowns with the federal money, but we have allocated out ESSER 1 funding. This is from Gopher. This was direct CARES Act money that went, that Gopher's decided to distribute to schools. And then this is ESSER 2. And then ESSER 3, once we have information about that, we'll be sharing that. And then this also is showing it kind of the one-time aid per pupil. So you can see a little bit in context about, you just have that information available for you to review. It also includes the one-time state aid, that $60 million up there. And it shows it, and I apologize, this document the writing got very tiny in this document. How that $60 million was distributed based on the district level. Normally, when you're looking at these spreadsheets, you're looking at municipal level, but this is school district level data. Senator Prentice, if you have a question. Oh,
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you for taking my question. So this is, I think it fits in right about now. Just trying to understand the timing on the release of the ESSER 2 funds. We had access to them in January, but I understand they weren't distributed until recently. How does that? Do you want to? Is now the right time to share that, or?
So that would be better discussed with other employees of the Department of Education. We don't have oversight over the ESSER 2 funds. I can tell you that they have been released. There are school districts. My understanding is that we were waiting for more clarification and information from the U.S. Department of Education, but we are not the appropriate staff to talk to about that.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. I'll lower my hand.
So this is, again, just information for you to review once you get the PDF version of it and you zoom in. The next document is just an adequacy aid history. Don't really have much to say about this, but it's useful sometimes to see the history of how adequacy has been distributed. So if you have any, again, you have my contact information. If you have any questions, you can contact me. But this will explain the rate amounts, the ADM counts, so you can see the trend line or lack of trend line. You can kind of run it like you would run through the formula, the cost of adequacy. And then some additional aid components. So stabilization, if you look at it, it started to decline, but then was restored. And you can sort of just see that history of how adequacy has gone out. So that's it for adequacy, district public school adequacy. Now we're going to move on to charter schools, unless there's any other questions about district public school adequacy. Charter schools, it's the same thing. Charter schools are charter public schools. So they receive adequacy just like district public schools, but it's slightly different. So this part, the cost of inadequate education, base aid, differentiated aid, all that goes out to charter schools the same way. The only difference is special education aid goes to the district of responsibility, and then they have to work with the charter school to compensate them.
The reason being for that is that the district of responsibility actually has fiscal responsibility for the special education components of the child's education, meaning that a child in, say, Academy for Science Design charter school that is special education, so the charter schools in Nashua, but the kid lives in Hudson, for example, Hudson School District would be responsible for paying for the child's special education. And that's done through a variety of different ways. Sometimes the school district will provide the exact resource, so they'll provide the services directly to the child. It might mean having the child come to the school, or it might mean sending school district staff to the charter school, or other times schools will reimburse the charter schools for the services that were provided. The law does actually leave this kind of up in the air. And leave it to the charter school and the individual district schools to figure out. And they usually have a MOU with the local school district. The charter school and the local school district have an MOU kind of designing exactly how that is going to be implemented.
Yep. So that's the only difference there when you talk about. Oh, sorry, Senator.
No, thank you. Caitlin, relative to that charge back to the public school district by the charters for special education costs, there are no standardized rates out there for contracted services for specialized needs, right?
That is correct. There are no standard rates, although a school and a district public school and a charter public school could certainly design rates that they would, reimburse no more than a certain amount, but that flexibility is entirely local.
And I raise it because part of the Senate Bill 158 from the School Funding Commission had a section that tried to establish that standardized rate for contracted services. It's an unfortunate consequence of not letting that bill go forward that we aren't taking up that question. Anyway, just wanted to establish we don't have that rate. School districts feel that it would be a value for them if the department could set that. And I assume you could, based on what some districts are paying.
That would be a better question for the Special Education Bureau, but I'm not sure that the department has the authority to do that either, because right. that would set it at a certain amount, and I think we would probably likely need legislation to do that.
And that's why it was part of that bill. Thank you.
So one of the difference, if you remember from the adequacy, again, this is on the LBA's website. The LBA published these briefs to explain the formula. But if you remember the adequacy aid, district public school adequacy aid formula, there was a swept component, there was a stabilization component. So that doesn't occur with charter schools. Instead, charter schools by statute get an additional grant. So you do the cost of inadequate education plus the additional grant, and then you get total charter school aid. The Virtual Learning Academy charter school is slightly different. They get a smaller grant that is adjusted by CPI every year. Oh, sorry, I didn't mention that is these rates you're seeing right here are adjusted by the CPI for every biennium. So if you're looking at the 2022 spreadsheets, you're going to see these going up by about 2%. And that's yeah, these are the numbers for state fiscal year 2021. And so if we move to 2022, 2023, they're CPI adjusted. So these dollars have increased by around 2%. And charter school under current law and under 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, no changes except for CPI adjustments. So between those two documents, you'll just see CPI adjustment changes. This document is just sort of a breakdown of the governor's recommended charter school aid, which I don't believe House Finance has modified and part of the formula or aid amount. Couple things to point out, charter schools come and go. Capital City Charter School just recently surrendered its charter. We have a couple schools here identified as charter schools we expect to start up in state fiscal year 2022. So those are flagged. That's this one right here, Heartwood. and Gathering Waters. And so this is just sort of a breakdown of how you get to how you build the charter school adequacy aid amount in the budget. This document is looking back at state fiscal year 2020. And similar to the documents you saw with district public school adequacy, it walks you through the adequacy aid formula, just sort of left to right, and produces a final grant amount. And it's very small writing. I'm sorry about that. Similar to what you saw with the enrollment trends for a 10-year period, this is enrollment trends going back to state fiscal year 2007 for charter schools. And so you can see some charter schools close, new ones open up at different times in the year, or different times throughout the period. And actually, that is the last document. So if anyone has any questions or wants to go back to a document or slide or discuss anything.
Mark, you might I think I see that the enrollment went up for whatever that far right column is, over the 4,000. So is the charter school grant adjusted for fiscal 22 and 23 to reflect the higher enrollment numbers?
Yep. So yeah, this is the breakdown of the enrollment. It's based on generally what the enrollments were reported to be. It does fluctuate because we have some new schools that are being added on, but these are the reported numbers. So yeah, we have 6,000 or so, 6,300 pupils.
So we do have 2 new schools that we anticipate opening in the fall of 2022. Those are the only applications that we have in hand right now. In theory, we may have 1 or 2 schools open in 23, but we do not have any completed applications in hand. So at this rate, so the State Board of Education accepts charter school applications twice a year, in January and in June. We don't anticipate any new ones going forward in June of this year, which means that the next one would likely be January of 2022. A school could potentially open in September of 22, which would be fiscal year 23, but it's highly unlikely just because of the amount of time, especially when it's a charter school grant that's available to an opening school. So when there's not a charter school grant that's available, charter schools will oftentimes try to rush to open because they don't have the ability to kind of plan their to plan in general. But the charter school grant specifically provides funding prior to opening for planning purposes for the schools. So the schools will typically take, a year or 2 to open. And then that really can sometimes help the schools have a better designed school and be a little bit further along when opening, rather than schools don't receive a grant. The ones that don't receive a grant, or when we haven't had federal money available to us in the past, are really reliant on either a private funder, which we have had some schools have, or they have to wait till their first day of school happens and then they have adequacy funding. So you'll oftentimes see a new school be able to do like the bare minimum. A new school will do the bare minimum to get a space maybe up to code with the local fire department and whatnot, and then start adding staff and whatnot after the first day of school, which is not ideal. And that's really the purpose of the charter school grant, is to kind of allow some of that. So,
and just as a budgeting question, so adequacy is, we have warrant authority to pay adequacy. We have to pay adequacy. So if one of these schools, if these enrollments increased, and this line, this is the amount of appropriations, say we have $46 million in appropriation, but say a bunch of students join charter schools, this number might increase above our appropriations. We're able to draw a warrant to make sure we can pay adequacy. So budgeting these numbers, it's kind of a moving target. You're never going to be, of course, 100% right, but just using some basic enrollment numbers, you can predict what you think the cost might be. But if if more kids join, if kids leave, we make those adjustments for the payments. Any other documents we want to go back to or anything we want to review?
All right, well, that's about the fastest we've ever gone through adequacy. So the committee has two different options. I'll let Senator Ward make the decision. So we also have on the phone today Amy Clark, who is available to talk about building aid. I know that you all had some questions in general about school funding. So that is the next largest pot of funding that's in the state budget, and I know we have a lot of questions. We can also go forward and hold that off and let Senate Finance potentially have any questions, or if they want to have a conversation about that in the future. But Amy is available, so you guys can make the decision whether you want a free hour or you want to hear more from the department.
Well, how much longer do you need to go through building aid?
So building aid typically takes about a half hour to an hour. It depends on the number of questions that the committee has. We could also talk about a couple other areas of funding, like the public school infrastructure fund. That's a little quicker. There are some decisions in the budget that were made about that, but we can just try to do building aid in about half hour if you'd like.
Any thoughts from the committee? What would you like to hear? Anything? Let's go with the building aid then.
All right. So Ava, if her name is Amy Clark.
Super. So I will bring, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring Amy Clark in. Does she have a separate presentation?
She does, yes.
Okay. So since I promoted you both to a panelist, Zoom webinars, we're also learning. I can't unpromote you without losing your ability to add you back in. So if you guys aren't going to be a part of this presentation, you can just turn your cameras off or stay on. It doesn't matter. I just can't unpromote you. But Amy Clark, I will promote her to a panelist. And Amy, if you wouldn't mind just sending along your presentation as well, that would be super, so I can provide that to committee members. Amy, you should be all set to unmute. I don't know if we lost her.
She is just getting up and going with her internet. I think she was just having a couple issues. So you just want to give her a minute. I think she had to maybe restart.
Sure.
Or maybe the committee wants to take another stretch break for a moment.
I just want to say to Caitlin and Mark, it's been very interesting. And some of these numbers that you have right now, are they official numbers? For example, do the school districts now can think about how much money they're going to get?
So that's a great question. And actually we should take a little bit of time while we're waiting for Amy to explain that to you. So what our process for adequacy is on November 15th of the previous year, the Department of Education produces an estimate for school districts to use for the purpose of budgeting and then tax rate setting purposes. So on November 15th, well, actually, on October 1st, the Department of Education works with all the school districts to count all the kids in school. So we count all of the enrollment, we count all of the number of kids that are free and reduced lunch and whatnot. Then we, through our systems, aggregate all of that information, and we use that to produce an estimate, which we published by law on November 15th. The school districts then take that November 15th estimate and build their school district budgets around that. So the school districts that just passed their budgets in the last couple of weeks here on town meetings day, they use that November 15th estimate. Now that November 15th estimate, as we just talked about, is historically low because of the low free and reduced lunch numbers, and then also some of the reduced counts. But the Department of Education, per the law, what we do is we will actually update that actual number at the end of the year So when the school districts end in June, they give us all of that information we collected on an updated basis. So they give us any new free and reduced lunch kids, any kids that have come and gone through their school district throughout the year. We aggregate all of that information, and then on October 1st, we finalize the calculation and we tell the school districts what their final amount is going to be. So we have the ability to adjust that basically up and through October 1st of each year to make any changes necessary. Now, the one thing that's a little bit complicated though is the school districts did just set their budgets on that lower amount. And so because that happens, the school districts now may receive additional funding from the Department of Education that was not included in their budget. So that money would go back to reduce taxes on the other side, because many towns had to use their local tax rates to raise more money than they normally would have, because was predicted less money from the state on November 15th of each year. So if you wanted the school districts to be able to kind of just include that in their budgets without actually going to their warrant, to their voters, you would have to have a law around that. But right now, that extra money that was not included in the state would go back to reduce taxes.
Okay, thank you.
Amy,
Amy,
Hey, can you all hear me?
we can.
Okay, so I lost internet right after Mark got done speaking. So great job, Mark. But I am now on my phone, which means I don't have the ability to share my presentation. But Caitlin, I emailed it to you.
I can share that for you.
And is my sound coming in?
Yes.
Okay. Meaning I know it's coming in because you're answering me, but I didn't know if it's clear because I can also find a little bit quieter spot if needed.
And Amy, you'll just have to actually.
I don't believe, so what I'll do, I think Caitlin, you just sent it to me. You and Mark don't have host capabilities to screen share, so I can screen share it. If it's or are you able to do it?
I just clicked the button.
Oh,
So
well then,
can you all see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's see. It's on my phone, so it's really tiny,
And
but you all can read that, okay? It's just essentially the cover sheet anyway, but. Okay, so if you're ready for me to begin, my name is Amy Clark and I'm with the Department of Education, and I'm the administrator for a program for a bureau called School Safety and Facility Management. And we deal with all things school facility related. You'll get a copy of this handout, and it has my contact information on there as well. And this is just a summary of what is in the packet. If you want to go to the next page, Kaylin, or whomever. So this is just a summary of the School Building Aid program. School Building Aid is one of the major programs in my bureau. It is also going to pertain to House Bill 594 when that comes over to you all, and as well as potentially something in House Bill 2. But the summary of my program is kind of a one-page summary. It has the citation of the rules and the law if you're looking for more information. The gist of Building Aid is that it's a state grant money to support school districts in meeting the cost of their construction or reconstruction projects. And I like to remind folks that these are large projects. We're not talking about putting on a new roof. We're not talking about painting or redoing floors or new carpet. We are really talking about major reconstruction projects and or complete rebuilds. And the state's share, considering for Building Aid in law, is between 30 and 60%. More affluent communities being around the 30%, less affluent at the 60%. It's actually a function, the formula is a function of median family income and equalized valuation per pupil. The average rate is 38%. I'd like to mention that too, because it's not a linear distribution. The bulk of the districts fall between 30 and 40%. I also like to mention with this formula that it is a function of median family income, but it's not a function of the actual amount. It's a function of the ranking of towns, municipalities, where they fall in the state of New Hampshire. So it's not that the actual dollar amount is as important as where people fall. Are they in the middle, at the top, or at the bottom, so to speak? The funding source for building aid is the Education Trust Fund. And just the funding structure of building aid is really that building aid has been funded since 1946 and funded reliably up until about 2009. And in 2000, I'm sorry, in between 1946 and 2012, the state paid a percent of the principal over the life of a bond. And in 2013, that funding structure was changed. And so instead of paying over the life of a bond, the state now pays 80% of the school's award upfront and 20% upon completion. So you can picture before 2012, when a project was built, we were paying over the life of the bond, which means we still have old projects that we're paying on because they still have bond payments that we're participating in the state share on. But for projects built after 2013, when building aid was funded, it is now 80% and then 20% upon completion. So 2 payments and that's it. So no more paying over the life of a bond. And just for a quick example, this is written down on the sheet, but just for a quick example, because I think the way building aid is paid becomes important in understanding the line item numbers that come toward you. For example, if a school district took out a 20-year bond, and let's say their project was $40 million to build a new school. And let's say, for example, their building aid rate, which is the state share, is 50%. What that means for their $40 million project is the state is going to kick in $20 million and the local community is going to kick in the other $20 million. If this were a project that was funded prior to 2013 under that old funding structure, if they had a 20-year bond, they would get their award, which would be 50% of that 40 million, which is that 20 million. They would get $1 million per year for 20 years on average. That would be what their payments would look like. That's how they would get their $20 million, $1 million per year for 20 years. But then when the law was changed in 2013, if that project came forward and same thing, they're seeking $20 million of an award from the state, we would pay them $16 million before they started construction and $4 million upon completion. So that's that 80-20 split. So again, 16 million upfront, 4 million upon completion, and then they're done. On this slide is also a little bit of history. Again, building aid from 1946 through 2007, roughly, money was appropriated to meet demand. So schools would come to the Department of Education and say, I have this construction project. We would report the totals to the legislature. The legislature would appropriate the money and we would distribute that to schools. In 2008 and 2009, the state was unable to pay that obligated payment. And so there was the shortfall of money. So the state was actually short in meeting those obligated funds for those past projects, 1 to 2 million. It really meant that we paid schools about 95% of their award. So we were short in 2008 and 2009. And then in 2010, the House Bill 2 imposed a 2-year moratorium on new projects. And what House Bill 2 said is, we're going to take 2 years. The Department of Education isn't going to fund any new projects, but we'll continue to support all the past projects, all those obligated payments that the state had to those past projects. They came up short in meeting that obligation. And so the state took out their own state bond. It was a 20-year bond in 2010 to pay those obligated funds. And then 2 years later, the moratorium was set to expire, but it was extended for another 2 years, another 2 years, another 2 years, and another 2 years, up until 2019. Then in 2020, the moratorium was officially removed from House Bill 2. And in 2020, this current biennium we're in, 2020 and 2021, we were able to fund 3 new projects. That total funding for new projects was approximately $8.6 million for those 3 new projects that are currently under construction as we speak. So you can see the state has been under funded from 1946, kind of got iffy between 2007 and 2009. There was an official moratorium for 10 years where no projects were built. And then in 2020, the moratorium ended and some money was appropriated to build new projects. So Caitlin, you can go to the next slide. Or I keep saying Caitlin, actually, I'm not sure who has it.
It's Caitlin.
Okay, thanks. So these other slides are a little bit just for information for you to have. This slide here, or this page, is just the building aid rates. If you were curious to see what does Allenstown get, you can see Allenstown's rate 60%. You can go through and see Bedford is 30% and so forth. So that is the different rates by town. Next page. Or, yep, you're good. So this slide is the slide that if you were going to look at one for a longer period of time, this probably would be the one. This page kind of tells a lot of information here. What it does is it shows a little bit of our, so a lot of times people talk about the tail when they're talking about building aid. And what they're talking about is these blue bars here. That is what we call the tail, or there are obligated funds for past construction projects. That was when the law said we continue to pay on the term of the bond. So you can see we continue to pay on schools until 2041. That is because one school district that was approved in 2009, their bond payment didn't start until 2011, and they had a 30-year bond payment, so their final payment is in 2041. But every year we pay off more and more projects, so the obligation becomes smaller. The bottom bar, this dark blue bar, represents those obligated payments. The light blue bar, which is the one on the top, is, if you recall, I mentioned that the state took out a bond to meet their obligation. They took out a 20-year bond. That light blue bar is the state's bond payment. What the law also says, so in 2013, when the law was changed to say we're going to put 80% up front of the project and 20% upon completion. The purpose of doing that, I think, was hoping that communities would not have to bond as much. Therefore, they could get their projects approved. Well, the law also put in a cap on building aid. It said we're no longer going to appropriate more than $50 million per year in building aid. And so that's why this graph goes up to 50 million. And you can see in 2020, if you look at the bottom of the fiscal year 2020, if we go from the top, the dark blue bar again is the obligated payments to past projects. The light blue bar is the state's bond. And then that dashed bar is what was in what was in the state budget for new projects. For the next fiscal year, which was fiscal 2021, again, we've got the dark blue bar of our obligated payments for past projects. The light blue bar is our state bond payment. And then you can see it doesn't go all the way up to 50 million. It's because building aid was not fully funded, but an additional $1.9 million was funded that year. And the total of for new projects was 8.6 million. That 6.7 million plus that 1.9 million was for new projects. And that again covered 3 projects. So there's no telling what's going to happen in the future here. But what we do know is that this is what the tail looks like for our current schedule of payments. Over in the table, I've highlighted this coming biennium. fiscal 22 and 23. If you're wanting to know what those numbers are exactly, those obligated payments to schools is 27 million in the first year, 25 million in the second year. You can also see this, the one that's not highlighted is $8.1 million is the state's bond payment, and $7 million is for year 2. So that will leave our total debt service for year 1 of 35 million and 32 million for year 2. I know there's so many numbers on here, so feel free to look at this and give me a call later too if you have questions. But that other column that's highlighted, the 15 and the 18 million, that's the, if building aid were fully funded at 50 million, that is how much by law we could give to new projects. Because we have a cap of 50 million, it says we can't spend more than 50 million, less our debt service would be 15 million for new projects for year 1, 18 million for year 2 if building aid were fully funded. And then the last column is just total for the biennium. So if there are no questions on that right now, we can go to the next one. I know that there's so much information and lots of numbers, so we can talk about that more if you'd like. So what do we have for fiscal 22 and 23 for applications? This is a list of projects that have applied for building aid. And in order to get building aid for the next biennium, you have to apply a year in prior. So these applications I received last year, they are very detailed applications for large construction projects. What happens is that they come into the department, they get reviewed by the Department of Education, they get ranked, they get sent over to the School Building Authority, which is a committee that reviews the Department of Education's ranking. And then this list goes to the State Board of Education for publication. It has gotten all the way through, up through publication. It has not been to the State Board of Education for publication yet. So I'm considering it a preliminary list, but this is how they have shaken out so far. This is in ranked order. You can see that first column is the preliminary ranking. So if the State Board of Education approves this list, it will become final, or if they don't approve it, then the ranking could change. You can see the district, the school name, you can see the rate at which they qualify for school building aid, and then you can see their project cost. You can also see a column with how much their building aid would be. So that, and then the last column is their current approval status. So how building aid works is, let's say it was fully funded and the Department of Education got that $15 million for new projects in year 1. This is a biennium list. So it would go down through the list, that $15 million, and offer it to the first school who has, in the ranked order, who has received local approval. In this case, rank 1 project would not be able to accept that building aid because they did not vote this year. And so, but Allenstown would be project number 2. They did get approval subject to receiving building aid. And so that money would go to Allenstown. And it would be 15 million, and their award is 19 million, 5. So in year 2, I would get a second pot of money. If building aid were fully funded, that would be $18 million. We would continue to pay the rest of Allenstown's award, which would leave me roughly another $15 million. And we would start at the top of the list again and offer it to rank 1, because next year they may have approved their project next year. But if not, we would continue down the list until we get a project that has been approved. I think that's it. Just the voting, you can see on this, you know, the ones that are highlighted have been approved. The only project on this list that is Allenstown, that their warrant article is to only construct if they receive building aid. If they don't receive building aid, their local voters did not approve that project. So, but you can see Salem, Nashua, Pelham, all have projects that have been locally approved with or without building aid. And then the others either failed or they did not vote. Most of them said they needed to know if they were going to receive building aid or not, and they would vote the following year if they were to receive aid. And then, of course, there's one more, it's Nottingham, and they actually pushed their vote to May. So we'll see where they stand in May. All right, next. This is, don't expect to read this. It will be in your handouts. This is the projects with a little more detail of what their project is. It just gives a little brief description of their project. So you can skip a couple pages, Caitlin. And then the remaining, well, almost the remaining, the next handful of pages are just the past projects that we're paying on. If you wanted to know, you could look these up by district. They are sorted by district. You can look to see, hey, what projects are outstanding for Concord, and you would have those there. I think, Caitlin, you can skip all the way to almost the last page, page 15. There you go. Faster than I am here. And then on this page, a lot of people wanted to know, well, sometimes I get the question of, during that moratorium, the state did not fund building aid for a 10-year period. And sometimes there's conversations about partially funding those projects. And so the department put out a survey. These projects are not verified. It's simply a response to a survey, but these are the projects that said they built during the moratorium. It's hard to say whether these projects would be eligible or not without reviewing a complete application. But the gist is, if you could scroll down to the next page, Caitlin, on the very bottom, just to see the totals. If you could see the totals on your screen in the very bottom, really this is to say that during the moratorium, there were $550 million worth of projects. If they had come for state aid, that would have been $192 million worth of state aid that was not given out at today's rates. And you can see the average project is roughly $19 million and roughly receives $6.5 million in state aid. That's on this list. And I think that is it. I know that it's a ton of information, but I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
On one of the slides where you talk about the building aid, the different towns or districts, I think were listed at different percentage points, like some of them were 30, some of them were 60, one was 47. How is that determined?
Yep, it's a function of just two variables. One is median family income, and the other is equalized evaluation per pupil. It's a ranking of where the town falls in the state of median family income, and a ranking of where they fall in the state with equalized valuation per pupil. And then there's a formula that you enter a table by, it's called the building aid factor, and it spits out those between 30 and 60% numbers.
So that's a number that could vary depending on what's happening in the world.
Not necessarily, well, correct. The only thing is that I like to point out, it's a ranking amongst each other in the state. So if you think of median family income goes up, typically what happens is everybody goes up. And if it goes down, typically everybody goes down. So it's a function of the ranking, not a function of the actual value.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Any other questions from the committee members? It's a lot of information.
Yes, it is. And I'm happy to repeat it as many times as you like. So I know not today, but if you need me to come back anytime, I'm happy to do so.
Well, at least I think we have sort of a basic understanding on what goes into it. And it may very well be that we need to go over it in more detail at some point in the future, but at least this gives us somewhat of an understanding what you people are doing over there.
Great, good.
Does the committee want to break for the day, or do you want us to do one more?
Let's see what time it is. It's 11:20. Any thoughts? Any
The wa-
input?
The one more that we would do would be catastrophic / state special education aid.
It looks like that would be a good one.
Yeah, okay, give me just a moment to find it and pull it up.
I really appreciate the three of you having come to do this for us. It's so much information and we come up against this all the time. It's nice to have an overview of all the different aids and how do you figure them out.
And this is what we do for work all day. And so being able to have the opportunity to talk about our programs, we love that. We're very proud of the work that we do. And, we spend a lot of time, and you can tell most of us are very passionate about it.
Mhm.
So we always love having an opportunity to talk about our work.
Well, I think you have a very receptive audience. So really appreciate for what you've done. Now, who will be doing this next session, that next section?
So it will be me again.
Okay.
So can you all see my screen? It says
Yep.
special education aid. Okay. Great. Okay, all right. So I'm going to talk about state special education aid. We do have an administrator who oversees this. She wasn't available for the phone call today, but I can at least do a very high level kind of introduction. And as long as you don't want to, know information about specific disabilities and about writing IEPs, I think I can at least provide you with enough information to be dangerous. So, so this program, special education aid, was previously known as catastrophic aid. That's what most people of you know what that is. It's a formula that provides funding to school districts that have high cost special education kids. So these kids are kids that they have an IEP to provide educational services relative to their disability, and the costs associated with those IEPs are greater than 3.5 times the average cost per pupil. So what the process is, so it's state aid, and it's provided across the state on the actual number of pupils that appear in the school each year. And so how it works is for a child, for a school district goes through the entire course of the year. At the beginning of the year, they design a child's IEP and they say which services the child's going to need. And then in the course of the year, they implement that IEP. Now, while they're implementing the IEP, they also have a general idea of costs associated with those services. At the end of the year, school districts add up all of the costs associated with that child's IEP. And if those costs exceed more than 3.5 times the state average cost per pupil, then they can provide that IEP and those essentially receipts associated with those services to the Department of Education. And we then review that and then pay the school districts for those costs. So I have here in front of me, so you can see the average cost per pupil. So in this past year, in order to be eligible for catastrophic aid, state special education aid, you have to have had costs exceeding $59,000 per pupil. And so these costs, I just want to point out, these are the special education costs alone. So services like PT, occupational therapy, having a paraprofessional, having an out-of-district placement. These are the costs that we're talking about that are in the child's IEP. So a school district goes through the entire year, adds up all of the costs, and enters them all into a system called NESIS, which is our state special education system. And it's on a by student basis. And we review that information to make sure that those costs were allowable and then also included in the child's IEP. Excuse me. I swallowed some air for a second there. Okay. Anyways, so How it works is the department, every year through NESIS, we go through and we look at the number of kids that are eligible. Now, when I say it needs to be in a child's IEP, unfortunately, we oftentimes have kids that have costs that are associated with them, but they're not included in the IEP, whether they're not special education costs or they were accidentally left out of the IEP, and that would make them ineligible. So for the purpose of calculating this, we have this formula here in front of you. So a child, we go through the entire year and they're adding up all of the invoices. So we have a child, for example, for all of their invoices equal $99,000 for that child. So that would usually be some OT, some PT, potentially a occupational, potentially a paraprofessional that's helping the child, other services, they all equal $99,000. That is from the beginning of the school year to the end of the school year. So we're talking about a 1 school year span. We then say, all right, well, what is the cap? So the cap this year was $59,000. So for every single kid that exceeds $59,000, that means they're automatically eligible for reimbursement. So we then say, all right, well, what is the amount associated above the cap? So $40,000 of that $99,000 is above the cap. Now there's a formula that's in law that says the Department of Education will reimburse 80% of costs above the cap. So by reimbursing 80% of the costs above the cap, we would then reimburse the school district $32,000 for that child. Now, this past year, in fiscal year 21, it was the very first time that catastrophic aid, state special education aid, has not been prorated for the last maybe 12 or 15 years, meaning that we had enough appropriation to pay school districts. So you can see here in front of you, so of the $40,000 that's eligible times 80% would be the $32,000 reimbursed at 100%. The Department of Education reimburses the school district for $32,000 of the $99,000 that was paid. So the school district's responsibility is still $67,000. It's quite a bit of money that they're incurring relative to the specific student. In the past, the Department of Education hasn't received enough appropriation to fully fund this amount. So the law says to prorate payments across the districts. So what we do is, a lot of people think that when we say, oh, well, we reimburse 70% this year, they think that we are this 80% up here becomes 70%. But no, that's not actually in fact true. We then reimburse 70% of the 80%. So for an example, in a prorated year, and the reason we're using 70% was because up until 2019, 70% was pretty average for the reimbursement rate. So the school district incurred $99,000 of costs. The 60%, the $60,000 was the 3.5 times that they have to incur on their own before they can even submit. That would be $40,000 at 80% for $32,000, but we didn't have enough proration. So across the state, what we owed to everybody was 70. We only had enough money to pay everybody 70%. So the state only reimbursed school districts $32,000 and the school district reimbursed $77,000. Now, as far as kind of what this looks like historically, so you can see we have the information for almost the last 20 years. Sorry, got a little mouse happy there. You can see that we have the last 20 years worth of information here. So for fiscal year 21, we had lower than normal kids that were eligible for reimbursement. We believe that's mostly relative to the pandemic, and kids that were in out of district placements were sent home or services were not necessarily able to be provided. So some of those kids cost less during fiscal year 20. So during all of fiscal year 20, school districts added up all of the invoices for the kids and sent everything to the Department of Education this past summer. We reviewed all of that and determined that the school district had incurred an allowable $79 million worth of expenses relative to these 742 kids. So the total amount, once we run the formula, so we pay 80% of the amount above the cap, was about $30 million. This year, we fortunately had $30.8 million of appropriation, meaning that we reimbursed everybody at 100%. Now let's look at fiscal year 2018 here. So in fiscal year 2018, we had 822 kids that school districts submitted for reimbursement. The school districts had allowable costs of $80 million. The state's share would have been 30 million.8. However, we only had $22 million of appropriation, meaning that we prorated the school district's expenditures at $72 million. So the school districts on their side of things, they paid $80 million and the state reimbursed $22 million, meaning that there was about $60 million that the school districts had to pay out of their own out of pockets relative to these specific students. Now, a lot of people ask, especially on some of these small districts, if this can be a burden for them because the school district has to go through the entire year before they're eligible to be reimbursed for costs. That is really a mechanism of the appropriation being so low, because we have to prorate the amount. We won't know how much we can pay districts until the entire year has gone through and school districts have entered all of the kids to us in a formula. And then we can then actually add up the information and figure out how much we owe for each kid. So I think there's, oftentimes concern every single year saying, well, a small school district, if they could access this money in say November, once they have enrolled the kid and the costs start adding up, that would be helpful. But it's really a mechanism of if there's not enough appropriation. Now, there is also legislation this year. I'm not sure the status of that legislation, but there is legislation to change this 3.5 times to 2.5 times. And so that will do a couple things. So that will make, of these kids, it will make a higher amount of the funding, of the expenses that they're incurring relative to these kids eligible. So at that 3.5 times, that the $60,000 cap would actually go down to about $40,000. So they could have more kids eligible or more expenses eligible. And then the other thing that they would have is that there are more kids that would become eligible because the school districts are only submitting the kids that they know have expenses greater than those 3.5 times. So we don't have any data at the Department of Education relative to those kids that are between 2.5 and 3.5 times. So the number of kids eligible would go up, as well as the amount of money that the school districts are eligible to receive. If you don't add any more appropriation and increase it to 2.5 times, that would just mean, oops, mouse is very touchy. It would just mean that the percentage pay, the proration, would go significantly lower. So we would be prorating payments and maybe around 50% or 70%. It's hard to know without having the actual data of the number of kids that are between that 2.5 and 3.5 times area, but that's kind of how that legislation would work. The other thing that I have here that I'll send over is, so this information, the reimbursement has nothing to do with the number of special education kids or what school district they fall under. If a school district is a poor school district or a rich school district or a receiver school district as far as statewide education taxes or anything like that. All it is where the kid is enrolled at the time, that's who received, and where the kid is enrolled and who paid for the services, that is who gets the funding. So you can see across the state there, of that 700 kids, most districts are receiving catastrophic state special education aid. You can see that there's quite a bit, but this could, shift around from year to year because the kids could be enrolled in different school districts from each year. So it's hard to say that a certain school district will receive more or less under this because it's based on a point in time where the child is actually enrolled. So that is, yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Senator Khan has his hand raised.
Oh,
I didn't know if you were going to move on to another section.
well, actually, so I'm done. So I can take as many questions or as little questions. So Senator Khan, if you want to.
That was pretty quick. Good job. Okay, so there are two ways of approaching the aid for special education. One is to look at the very high end of the costs and try and cover more of the high end costs. The other is to recognize in the school aid formula something more than $1,995 as the average additional cost or state aid per special education student. And somewhere in between is the real truth. We know that from our local districts that they're experiencing huge costs by carrying the $60,000 per student at the high level, but they're also carrying very high costs along the way. And so there are two ways to go about that. And I just wanted to draw the link back to the adequacy aid formula.
Yeah, and people are often confused with, if this is adequacy aid or, if this is the money that's in the formula. And so I guess technically, so when a school district says receives, 67 or is receiving $32,000 for that kid, they are also receiving an additional almost $2,000 from the adequacy formula for that child. But yes, there is some link, and then also this is an entirely separate pot of money, so it's kind of disaggregated as well. Any other questions?
Yeah, I noticed that depending on the year, sometimes you reimbursed at 100% and went down as far as almost 70%. What
Yes.
decides that?
You guys.
The appropriate, where does the money come from?
Yep, so that money is the amount that is appropriated to the Department of Education in our budget every single year. So the Department of Education, so this spreadsheet here, you can see it goes back for a couple of years. This is what we present every year as part of our budget. And it's the legislature that determines that amount. So you can see back in 2008, 2009, it was up to $30 million, $33 million that was appropriated to the department. And then you can see 2010, 11, 12, the amount was cut down by quite a bit. And we all know what happened economically at that time. And there was some substantial cuts that were done to the state budget, including cuts that were done to the state appropriation for state special education aid. So this is the information that's determined by the legislature each year. And, the 3.5 times, as you can see, does just tend to increase a little bit more each year. So that part is, and the actual 80% of the formula is pretty stagnant,
So it's up to the legislature, is that what you're saying?
yes, entirely up to you.
Okay, thank you.
I'll add, while I'd like to say last year's or 2 years ago, our finance committee did a wonderful job of trying to pair up actual expenses and appropriation. I think we need to, this year's finance committees are going to need to take into account that a lot of students were unable to access or because of the pandemic, chose not to access services that might have been out of the home. And for that reason, I would encourage us to think about looking a look back on special education expenses in the same way that we've done a look back on enrollment and free and reduced lunch as we appropriate, so that we don't short the districts for the expenses that they're likely to incur. And in 22, they're really just reimbursing themselves for 21. So again, it'll be a lower number, but for 23, hopefully we're back to normal. Students are getting all the assistance that they need in order to be successful. And we pay so little towards these costs that I'd hate to see districts shorted. My point. Thank you.
But with some of the small districts, having that extra money that they have to pay out is really devastating in some instances.
Absolutely. I mean, if you have a school district that has, a $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 budget, and then you have a child come in or two children that come in or that are each a $200,000 out of district placement, you can have a school district budget double relative to those children. And I can tell you that I get the calls every single year from some people in some of those small towns that are very upset about this, and they want to know what they can do about it. Because you're absolutely right. It can be quite challenging.
Yep. Any more questions? Looks like Caitlin, Mark, and Amy that you have answered everything. So now we know everything, right?
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, I just want to also again say thank you for giving us the time to do this and talk to you all. We are here at the department and are always able to take questions, jump on committee meetings if you have something quick. We always want to make sure that you have all of the information that you need when you're making the decisions around some of these very tricky topics. So thank you for taking the time to listen to us today.
Well, thank you three very much for having availed yourself, come and help us sort things out. I'm sure there'll be questions coming up, but I really appreciate what you did. So thank you very much.
Have a
Thank
good
you
day.
all. Thanks. Have a good day.
Caitlin, before you go, it's Ava. Would you mind just sending that last presentation
Yes.
that I can provide it to the committee members? Thank you so much.
It'll be great to have as a resource. Okay, so back to the committee. I think we are finishing up and we can close the hearing. Is that right, Ava?
Yeah, we in the calendar notice, we had noted that if there were any extra time, an executive session may follow, but we have about, roughly 15 minutes. So we did a lot of execing this morning, so that's up to you, Madam Chair, but we don't have to exec at this point.
I think we did a very good job. And I think that the 18 minutes remaining, if you like to take that and have it and have an early lunch or whatever. So
Super. Then all we need is a motion to adjourn.
to adjourn. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So
Senator
moved.
Prentice. Khan. Okay, Senator Khan,
Second, yes.
Senator Hennessy,
Yes.
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Rishardi, and Ruth Ward. Yes, we are adjourned and we'll see you next Tuesday. Thank you all.